we say that we want all the poles to be on the right hand side of the S plane. So this was one case that we studied where we were considering simple poles, real ones on left and right. This is the second case that we studied when you have a double pole at on the left hand side and you have a single pole on the right. And the system is again unstable primarily because of this. But if you have a double or a multiple pole at some real value of sigma, then a real value of s, then you will get something like this term and this term, which essentially will give you a stable system. Let's look at some other possibilities. Um, let's say that you have a pole here. So let me just call this as some a plus jb. So if you'll have a pole here, then you will also have a pole somewhere here, which will be a minus jb, because they'll be complex conjugate. So the transfer function will be something like s plus a plus jb, s minus a minus jb, right? Now this could be written as s minus, sorry, this will be a minus a and this will be a minus a because we are on this side of the S plane. So there is a negative sign here and there is a negative sign here. So it will be minus a plus jb plus b over s minus a plus jb, right? So whatever are the values of a and b, that's different. So this is going to essentially give you e to the power minus a jb t plus b to the power minus a minus jb t. So you have a e to the power minus at into e to the power jbt plus b e to the power minus at into e to the power minus jbt. Now if you look at this solution, this is an exponentially decaying term. What is e to the power jbt? Is this a bounded term or is it an unbounded term?
Sir, it's a sine function essentially.
So essentially it's a sinusoidal function. So it is a bounded term because you'll have a cos bt plus j sine bt, and both sine and cos are bounded. So this function is essentially bounded. We don't have to worry about this. So this is always bounded. We don't have to worry about this. This is also always bounded because you don't have to worry about this. So essentially, if you have complex complex poles on the left hand side of the S plane, the stability or instability essentially is determined by the real part of that root. So e to the power minus 80 decays. Here also you have e to the power minus 80. So the entire thing is going to decay, and even the complex poles on the left hand side of the S plane are going to give you a stable configuration. So this is again, if the roots are complex but are on the left hand side, the system again remains stable. So let me just write it here. So this is just a second. So the system is going to be stable, and let me just look into this. So this is going to be unstable. This is going to be unstable. This is also unstable. So I guess I think this is clear now that if you have roots here, A minus JB. So this is the fourth possibility. Then this is going to be something like S minus A plus JB into S minus A minus JB. So this will give you a function of the form AT e to the power j bt plus b e to the power at e to the power minus jbt. So now this is increasing, this is increasing. We don't really need to worry about this and this because they are anyways bounded. So this is going to be unstable because this is going to grow e to the power at. So this is unstable. Okay. Then if we look at this case where we have, poles here and here. Okay, so then what is going to be the scenario? The scenario is going to be you have j omega here and you have minus j omega here. So this will basically look like S minus j omega and this will be S plus j omega. Right, so this will be, this is the fifth case. Let me just write unstable here. So this is unstable. Okay. Now, if you have something like this, then this again will become something like AE to the power j omega t plus BE to the power minus j omega t. And this is stable because this is bounded and this is also bounded because this is just be a cos and sine function. So this is stable. So these are cases when the roots are purely imaginary and are simple in the sense that S minus j omega to the power 1 and S plus j omega to the power 1. So this is like, simple, purely imaginary roots. So this is the case. Okay, let's look at another case. Now you have something like this and you have a multiple pole at this place. So let me just call this some j omega and let me call this some minus j omega. So what kind of a function you will get? You will get S plus j omega whole square S minus j omega whole square. So how would this become? This will become some A over S plus j omega plus A1 over S plus j omega whole square plus A2 over S minus j omega plus A3 over S minus j omega whole square. And you can find out the values of A1, A2, A3. So if you take the inverse, so you're going to get something like A e to the power minus j omega t. Okay, no problems with this. The second part is going to give you some A1 t e to the power minus j omega t. Right? Then you will get a term a2 e to the power j omega t plus a3 t e to the power j omega t. Here also I've used the property that t times ft is equal to minus df over ds. Not equal to, it is basically an equivalence relation from time to Fourier Laplace domain. So this is okay, this is stable, this is also bounded, but here you have a ramp and a bounded. So if you multiply a ramp with bounded, it is going to basically increase. And the sorry. So this is bounded. So this is bounded, but this is not bounded. This is not bounded. So this is unbounded. So t e to the power minus j omega t is unbounded. T e to the power j omega t is also unbounded. So fundamentally the function is unstable. So you can unstable. So this was the problem that I asked. I asked you, why do you think that the multiple order purely imaginary roots are going to be a problem for us? And this is the reason why they're going to be a problem for us. Can anybody tell me what will happen if we have a pole at zero, at origin? What will happen when we have a pole at origin? So you have a pole here. What will happen? Can anybody tell me?
Sir, it will still be stable.
It will still be stable. Why? Because if you take an inverse, you'll get something like ut, right? You'll get a constant value. So basically, if it is this, then you know that 1 upon s is basically your inverse would be a ut. So your time domain representation to be a constant value, which is 1. And if you had something like a over s, then this value is going to be basically a. And it is bounded so long as a is less than infinity. It is a bounded value, right? So if you have a simple pole at origin, it will still remain stable. But if suppose you have, let's say, one pole at origin and you have another pole at origin, then what will happen? Then you have something like a over s square. And a over s square we know is going to give you it will give you a ramp. And ramp is not stable, right? Ramp is like ramp is not bounded, ramp is unbounded. So this is going to be unstable, but this is going to be stable. Simple pole at origin is going to be stable, but this is going to be unstable. Right? And then if you have three poles at origin, if you had this one, then you have another one, and let's say that you have another one. So if you have three poles at origin, then you get a term like a over s cube. So then this is going to be like a parabolic thing. So this is going to go something like this. This will go something like this, a parabolic t square kind of a thing. So again, this is going to be unstable. So you have an idea now based on the location of the roots whether the system is going to be stable or not. We have considered 8 possibilities. Okay, so the basic idea is that you try to formulate the transfer function and then you take an inverse Laplace and then you see whether the function that you obtain in time domain is actually decreasing as time increases, or it is remaining as an oscillatory thing, or it is going to be going to increase as far as the amplitude is considered. So it will be unstable, it will be Bibo unstable if the amplitude increases, and it will be Bibo stable if the amplitude remains either constant or it decreases. So that is basically the idea. So that was basically what I wanted you people to look into. Okay, so let's begin with the lecture, which we are talking about Routh-Hurwitz criteria. So yesterday we talked a little bit about Ruth Hurwitz's criteria. We said that there are some necessary conditions that need to be satisfied, but they're not sufficient. Then Ruth came in and he gave a necessary and sufficient way to figure out whether the system is stable or not. And he said that you have to evaluate n Hurwitz polynomials, and they all have to be positive. But that was very tedious to do, so that is not going to be adopted. Then Ruth came and he came up with some tabular method, which came to be known as Ruth Hurwitz criteria, and we kind of saw a little bit of it yesterday. So we're going to build on that, and we'll see how we can use that to predict absolute stability. So there is one thing that there are two things I want to say before we start doing this. Number one is, I repeat again that Ruth Hurwitz criteria tells you whether the system is stable or not stable. It cannot give you how stable a system is, to what extent it is stable. It does not tell you where and second thing is, it does not tell you where the poles are located. It will not give you the location where the poles are, but it will not give you the precise location, but it will tell you they're either on the left hand side or they're on the right hand side. That is what it's going to tell you. It is going to tell you the system is stable or the system is unstable. It will tell you also how many roots are there on the right hand side of the S-plane. So these are the things that Ruth Hurwitz criteria tells you. Of course, the method that we're going to do right now is not an exhaustive method. It cannot be applied to all systems, but it passes tests for most of the systems. There are some exceptions I will discuss, and I intend to give as a project some of these exceptions, and people should come up with work, which I will tell them once I assign a project. But there are some interesting things in Ruth Hurwitz. A great amount of research has gone into it. People have published transaction papers on Ruth Hurwitz criteria quite late, much before even I was born. But the point is that this is an interesting topic, and I need to give it as a minor project. But anyways, so let's understand some very simple, straightforward cases, and then we will slowly go into the cases where the things are not so simple. So let's look at one of the examples of Ruth Hurwitz criteria based on the tabulation method that we had done. This is a problem from Kuo only. So this is a solved problem in Kuo, but it's a good problem to start with. So let's say that we have a characteristic equation which is given as follows. Okay. We see that all the coefficients are of same sign and no term is fundamentally missing. So that's okay. That necessary condition is satisfied. So now we go for the tabulation method. I write S4. So I write 2, then I take 3, and then I take 10. So these are all even powers of S that I've taken. Then we come to S cube. So S cube is 1, then you have 5, and then you have basically 0. So we go ahead and we write S square. So S square will be 1 into 3 and minus 2 into 5 divided by 1. So that is 3 minus 10 divided by 1, which is minus 7. Okay, then you have 1 multiplied by 10 minus 0 multiplied by 2 divided by 1, which is basically 10. And then you have 0. So this is the third row we get, we create. Then we come to S to the power 1. Then now you have minus 7 multiplied by 5, which is minus 35. So you have minus 7 multiplied by 5 minus 10 multiplied by 1. So this is 10 divided by minus 7. So this value comes out to be 45 by 7. 45 by 7 कितना हुआ? 6.4 something.
6.42.
This is 6.42. Okay, thank you. So this will be 6.42. Then minus 7 multiplied by 0, 0 multiplied by 1. So this is going to give you 0 and this is going to give you 0. Then you come to s to the power 0, that's the last row. So 6.42 multiplied by 10 minus 0 multiplied by minus 7 divided by 6.42. So you basically get a 10 here. Then you have 0 and then you have 0. So now this is the table. So at s equal to 0, you have this table and that's it. Now if we basically look at this column, which is the first column, that is what we do in Routh-Hurwitz criteria. And if we see, so the first term, the first element is 2 positive, second is 1 positive, third is minus 7 negative, fourth is 6.42 positive, and then you have 10 which is negative. So that means that there is a sign change that exists in the first column. And if there is a sign change, that means that there are roots on the right hand side of the S plane. That means there are poles on the right hand side of the S plane. So this means sign change in the first column means presence of roots in right hand side of S plane. Okay, and then you see that there is a sign change here from positive to negative, and then there is a sign change here from negative to positive. So there are basically two sign changes. Two sign changes. That means there are two roots on, two roots on right hand side of S plane. Okay, so this is an example. This system is going really slow. I'll just probably log out once and then log in or start my system again. I'll come back in like 2 minutes. Let's take a small break. I'll come back in like 2 minutes.
Before you go, sir, ये जो method हमने भी use किया है, ये essentially है तो continued fraction expansion ही.
It is busy. If you look at Hurwitz criteria, that is a continuous expansion. So yeah, it is a continuous expansion. Some kind of a modification of that only. You must have started.
Sir, isn't there? I asked. जो कुछ log 1 plus n करके होता है.
You're basically deriving all this from something that you may be studying in network analysis, right?
Yes, sir.
में आप पढ़ते हैं Hurwitz polynomial और ये सब, right? That is what you're trying to come at, right?
Yes, sir.
Even it is. You can derive. You can write it as a continuous fraction. I think last time you people did not study this in NAS, but I think probably you're studying it this time. It has similarities, but I'm not quite sure how everything from network analysis could be transferred here. But yes, I mean, this is going to be something that can be related to that also. So yeah, continued fraction definitely is there. So you can actually have different ways to write it. So tabular method is something that people are generally comfortable with compared to continuous fractions. Continuous fraction seems to be a bit, you look at it, it seems a little difficult to write. So some people it is intimidating. This seems to be a simple method, but yeah, you are on correct lines. Yeah, that kind of a thing can also be done. I think if you pick up any network analysis textbook, you will find Routh-Hurwitz criteria, and you will see that those kind of.
No, sir, but there's also this one criterion for stability which has a formula around log 1 plus n or something?
Well, I mean, just show it to me sometime, maybe today, or maybe just refer to me the book or something. I'll look into it and
Okay, sir. Okay.
we will do that. Yeah, we'll do that. But as far as control system is concerned, well, this method works. I mean, I don't know what that is. Let me just look at it if you give it to me, and then let's see if we can relate the two things. Okay, or if that could be an alternative method. I don't know. So, but we'll see. You give it to me. I'm just going to log off 1 minute, and then I'm going to come back again, and let's hope things become better. Okay. So just a second. Yeah, so can you see the screen? Just let me know.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so that means that there are 2 poles on the right hand side, and therefore the system is unstable. Okay. So this is basically what Ruth Hurwitz is going to tell you. It of course does not tell you whether the roots are simple. It does not tell you whether the roots are complex. So you don't know, but you know that the roots are going to be on the other side. Of course, it seems to be like a 4th power equation, so it has to be most probably there will be complex roots to this. But the point is that there are 2 roots on the right hand side, and the system is unstable. That is what it is. Now you can there are a lot of problems based on this, but there are some special cases to Ruth Hurwitz criteria, some straightforward special cases, and then there are some not so straightforward special cases. But we'll only study some straightforward special cases. The not so straightforward special cases, I think probably we'll take them up as some sort of a mini project, and I'll briefly discuss what they could be. Okay, so some special cases to Ruth Hurwitz criteria. RH, Ruth Hurwitz criteria is written as RH criteria. Okay, one is if the first element of any row becomes 0. That means if you look at this, suppose let's take this row. So if suppose instead of 1 we had a 0 over here, that is what I mean. So the first element of any row becomes 0. That is a special case, and that there is nothing much that you can say other than the fact that maybe the coefficients of the equations are in such a way that it is coming out to be 0. There is no great physical insight into the fact that what is the physical meaning of the fact that a 0 can come in the first element of the row. But yeah, it could just be that the coefficients are arranged and are chosen in such a way that it comes out to be 0. Then what happens? So that is basically what we look into. The second is all the elements of any row becomes 0. The entire row becomes 0. This does have kind of a physical significance. This happens when you have what you call as what should I say? Symmetrically located roots. Symmetrically located roots. This is often seen, but the point is that these are 2 conditions that we will consider as special cases. One of the element becomes equal to 0 in a row, and the second is the entire row becomes equal to 0. Okay, so let's look at them one at a time. So basically, if we were to talk, then when first happens, we apply something called as an epsilon rule, where epsilon is almost equal to 0, but a very, very small value, and it has to be a positive value. It's like we perturb the system slightly so that this coefficient is not considered as 0, but it is a very small value, and we take it by default as positive. And in the second case, what we do is that we follow an auxiliary equation rule. Auxiliary equation rule. I'll come to that, but these are basically what happens. So epsilon rule applies to one, auxiliary equation rule will apply to second. So let's take up these cases as specific examples again from Kuo. I'm taking these examples. So let's say that the equation is S4 plus S cube plus 2S square plus 2S plus 3 equals 0. Suppose you have something like this. So, all coefficients are the same sign, no term is missing, that's okay. So we proceed further. So we write S4, so it becomes 1, it becomes 2, it becomes 3. Then we write S cube. S cube becomes 1, it becomes 2, and this becomes 0. Okay, so now let's proceed to S2. Now S2 is basically this multiplied by this minus 2 multiplied by 1. So that is basically 0 divided by 1, which is 0. So this is a 0, and then on this side you get basically a 3, and then you have a 0. Now you encountered a 0 in the first element of this row. The problem with 0 coming over here is that if you were to evaluate the coefficient of S1, it will be 0 into 2 minus 3 into 1 divided by 0. So this will be something like infinity. It will reach some infinite value. And you can't really do much if you have such value. So what we do is that we assume that this is not 0, but it is some value epsilon, which is close to 0, and it's a positive value. This is by default. We take epsilon, I again write as positive value, in such a way that epsilon is nearly equal to 0, but positive. So if epsilon is here, then what will be the element here? The element here will be 2 times epsilon minus 3 by epsilon. And this value, and since epsilon tends to 0, this value will nearly be equal to minus 3 by epsilon. We are taking it to be extremely small. So we set this to be 0, and this becomes minus 3 by epsilon, where epsilon is almost equal to 0. That means this is a very large negative value. Minus 3 over a very small value will be a very large negative value, but we still consider it to be some finite value, but extremely large negative. The second term will of course automatically become equal to 0, and this will become equal to 0. S0 becomes equal to 3, so because this multiplied by this, 0 multiplied by epsilon divided by minus 3 by epsilon, which is 3, and we are. So this is how we formulate this table. Now, you don't necessarily need to do this calculation here, but the reason why I did it was so that things become a little simple to multiply. So we basically look at this column now again, this one, and we see that this is plus 1, this is plus 1, this is plus, epsilon is positive, so this is plus term, but you get a negative term over here, which is a large negative term because epsilon is close to 0, and then you get another positive term. So that means there are 2 sign changes. And therefore, there are two poles on the RHS, right hand side of S plane. Fundamentally, the system is unstable. That's all. I mean, there is nothing much to say. That is how we work when one of the elements is we take an epsilon and we work with it. I'll give you some more examples. I'll put it up on the group today. There is one thing. There is a question now, and this is for you people to again see, is that this epsilon method may not give correct results. If the poles or the roots of that equation, characteristic equation, if the roots are purely imaginary. Purely imaginary. So this is going to be one of the sub problems of the mini project that I'm going to give to a group, that they have to kind of prove this and take some examples to show why such a thing is true. There are some papers on this, and any group that actually gets this project, I'm going to give them those papers, and they just probably have to read a little bit and try to understand the algorithm. But this is true that epsilon method may not give correct results if the roots are purely imaginary. So this is an exception, but most of the times it does give you correct roots, even when the roots are imaginary, but at times it may not. So those papers discuss this, and maybe as a mini project this could be looked into in more depth. Okay, but not primarily for this class per se. We don't really need to go that deep into the method, but this is there, and this is going to be a part of one of the mini projects that I give. It's an interesting problem.
So,
yeah.
So in this exception, sir, हम epsilon method की help.
Can you type on the chat what you say?
Sir, can you hear me now?
Can you type on the chat what you say?
Okay, sir, I'll type.
Daksh, I can't hear what you're saying. Just type on the
Sir, he's saying he's typing.
I can't hear anybody, I think. That is the problem. Let me just proceed further, and let's just... Daksh, please write it on the chat so that I can answer. I mean, if there is a problem, then I need to clear it and then move ahead.
Okay, sir.
Likho zara. I'm waiting. Okay, just let me read. We use this method to find stability and location of roots, but how will we know if the roots are imaginary or beforehand? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is going reverse. So of course, you do not know that the roots are either real or imaginary or purely imaginary, but let's say that you know beforehand what the roots are, and then you kind of still want to see whether the system is stable or not. So when people knew what the roots are and they tried to work with it, and when those roots were imaginary, they saw that this method does not work sometimes when the roots are imaginary. So there are some peculiar features which will happen while you're doing this work. You will come to know that the roots are imaginary. So this is one of the very exceptional cases. That's why I'm not saying that this is something which is taught in general, and that's why it is a part of a mini project. But when sometimes you know that the roots are imaginary and you apply Routh-Hurwitz criteria, it fails, because the problem is that why would it fail? It will fail because fundamentally the principle of Routh-Hurwitz criteria is to tell you whether the roots are on the left hand side or the roots are on the right hand side. But what if they are purely imaginary? If they are purely imaginary, then the roots are going to be somewhere on the imaginary axis. It is neither left of the S-plane, it is neither right of the S-plane. Then you're taking epsilon, which is a value with which you're perturbing the system. Then you're perturbing the system with a value of epsilon. Is it moving towards the right side of the S-plane? Everything? Is it making everything move to the left side of the S-plane? Those things you don't really know. So that's why sometimes you may have a problem. But fundamentally speaking, the method is not going to give you good results if the roots are only purely imaginary anyways, because you can't really say whether that root is on the right hand side of the S-plane or the left hand side of the S-plane, because it's on the imaginary axis. It's neither left neither right. So fundamentally you can just say from the face of it that the method will obviously face some difficulties if the roots are purely imaginary, because then you can't really say whether it's on the right hand side or the left hand side. Then it is also seen that if suppose one of the elements of the first row is 0 and you take the epsilon value, and this epsilon is a small perturbation, it again complicates the system further, because you don't really know what this perturbation is going to do to the location of the roots. It could just be that a pole which is there on the imaginary axis tends to move towards left hand side. So system may turn out to be stable, but essentially it is not stable. It is marginally unstable or it is completely unstable. So those kind of things are there. So, but yes, your point is, if we do not know where the roots are, then why is it that you are saying that this will not work? But when this does not work, suppose you already have a system that you know is unstable, but you apply Routh-Hurwitz criteria and it tells you that the system is stable. That means there is something fundamentally wrong with the Routh-Hurwitz criteria, because mathematics must substantiate something which we see in physical life. If mathematics gives you a result contrary to what you see in physical life, that means there is something wrong in the mathematics that you're doing. So there have been some systems that have been found to be unstable, but Routh-Hurwitz criteria gives them to be stable. Then there is a problem with Routh-Hurwitz criteria. Similarly, it was observed that there were some systems in which if analysis was done, the roots were found to be purely imaginary. And in those cases when Routh-Hurwitz criteria was applied, the method may not have worked at that point of time. So that's why this statement that I've written has come after a lot of physical verification of some systems, and then coming to the conclusion that the Routh-Hurwitz criteria may not work when the roots are purely imaginary. So that is basically what it is. I hope I've answered your question. Let's proceed. Yeah, okay. Let me just see what you wrote. So, sir, should we still use this method knowing that there is a chance that we may get wrong results? Well, as I said, that this is an exceptional case. So the problems that will be formulated to you are not going to be such. But most of the times it works. I mean, had it been a method that would give you a wrong answer, even 10% or 15% of times, it would not have been a good method. But there are some exceptional cases, maybe 0.1% of the cases where it does not really work. So that's okay. When you come to testing a physical system, there are a lot of approximations that you take. Routh-Hurwitz criteria may be applied to a system which is an approximate version of a real system. So it may give you stability, but fundamentally the system may be wrong. So, those things are always there. But by and large, the method is known to work. And that is why we are studying it. Okay, so that is what it is. Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go to the second case, which is when the entire row becomes equal to 0. So let's look at that example. and see how we actually work around with this case. So let's say that we have S5. This is again a problem from 4s4 plus 8s cubed plus 8s square plus 7s plus 4 equals 0. Okay, so let's write them. So we have S5, so that is 1, then you have 8, and then you have 7. Then you have S4, which is 4, 8, and 4. Okay, so we proceed further. We write S3. So S3 is 4 times 8 minus 8 times 1 divided by 4. So that is 32 minus 8 divided by 4. It comes out to be 6. Then 4 times 7 minus 4 times 1 divided by 4. So this also comes out to be 6. Then there is no term here, so this is fundamentally 0. Then we write S square. S square is 6 times 8 minus 6 times 4 divided by 6. So that comes out to be 4. Then you have 6 times 4 minus 0 times 4 divided by 6. So that comes out to be 4. And then, of course, this term is basically 0. Now, when you come to S1, then 4 times 6 minus 4 times 6 divided by 4 is 0. 4 times 0 divided by, 4 times 0 minus 0 times 6 divided by 4 is again 0. And then you have again 0. So now you have a problem here. You cannot proceed further. You have all elements to be equal to 0. Okay. So what do we do? So there is an algorithm that is followed, and the algorithm is as follows. We form an auxiliary equation using the coefficients of the row preceding the 0 row. In this case, we will form the auxiliary equation using this row because it precedes the row with all zeros. That is point number 1. Second is, we evaluate dA by ds. So auxiliary equation is some as. So we evaluate dA by ds and we get some expression. Okay. Then the third is we replace the 0 row by the coefficients of equation dA by ds equals 0. We replace them. We'll see what it means. And then we continue. Normally. So if the problem persists again, Then we again form an auxiliary equation and work. If a 0 comes as the first element, we take it as silent. So those things are there. But fundamentally, we go like this. So let's look at the problem. So if we see this problem, then the row that we will use to form the auxiliary equation is this S square row. So it has 4 and 4 here. So your AS fundamentally becomes 4S square plus 4. Because it starts with the S square term, so the first coefficient becomes S square. The second coefficient will be 4 to the power S0, and then you'll proceed further. Like for example, if S cube row was 0, and okay, one more thing I want to say is that you will always get a 0 row which will be an odd. And this is also a question that I want to put, is that why is it that always the odd function row, odd power of S will be 0, but even power will not be 0. But that is what happens. In all the cases that are observed where the rows are entirely 0, those rows are always formed when the coefficient is S to the power 1 or S to the power 3 or S to the power 5, but never when it's even. That has to do with something, and that's a question I put to you. Try to think about it. You should be able to get an answer. Anyways, but if suppose this row was 0, then we would have made the auxiliary equation using this row. Then it would have been 4S4 plus 8S square plus 4. That is what it would have been. Okay, anyways, so this is 4S square plus 4. Then next is we evaluate dA by ds. That comes out to be 8S. Then we put dA by ds, which is 8S equals 0. Then we choose the coefficients of this to replace with the 0th row. So what was the 0th row? 0th row was S to the power 1, 0, 0, 0. So if you look at this equation, which is 8S to the power 1, and everything else is 0. So what happens is that over here, instead of 0, this becomes 8. So this becomes 8, 0, 0. So then you proceed further, you come over here. So this becomes 8 into 4, 0 into 4 divided by 8. So that is 4, and everything else remains. So now fundamentally, if you look at this row, you have 1, you have 4, you have 6, you have 4, you have 8, you have 4. No sign change. Therefore, no roots on the right hand side of the S plane. The system is fundamentally stable. So this is stable. Okay, so I have given you one question to ponder over, and the question is, why is it that zeros, the entire row 0 will always be at an odd power of S? That is the question. So the question is, think about it. Why 0 row will occur at odd power of S? That is the question. Think about it. So we have covered all the cases that we had to cover. In the next class, probably we'll do some more numericals, and we'll see some different kinds of numericals that could be asked using Noether-Witts criteria. There are a lot of things that can be asked. But this is a fundamental question that I'm going to revisit before we start the class. There was another thing that I had talked about, for which Daksh asked a question. Where is it? Yeah. So this is an interesting thing, and we will definitely put it as a mini project, and I will tell you where you can study it from. There is another thing. There is another case which I think probably we should be looking at when we will study, when we're going to be looking at mini projects. Is so we have studied this case when the first element is 0. We have studied the case when all elements are 0. There could also be a case where I would say that the first few elements are 0, but the rest are non-zero. Matlab, something like this. Something like this. Suppose you have some row, let's say it is S cube row. So you have 0, 0, and then you have 1 and you have 2, something like this. Or let's put it a higher row. Let's put it as S5 row or something. So if you have, say, 3 here. So now not only is the first element 0, but the second element is also 0, but the rest of the elements are non-zero. So this is somewhere in the middle. So what will happen for such cases? So this problem is also going to be taken up as a mini project. So this is also an interesting problem. So though of course in the normal course of subject, these are not the cases that we study, because these are some exceptional cases in which deep research has gone into. But fundamentally for most of the systems, they could be tackled by the 3 methods that we have studied. One is a simple method in which there are no non-zero elements. The second one is if there is a first element which is 0, and then you apply the epsilon rule and you get good results for most of the cases. And then the third is when the entire row is 0. So these are basically the 3 fundamental cases of Routh-Hurwitz. I have discussed some of the exceptional cases, which we are going to take up as some problems as mini projects. And that's it. So that's the end of the class today. We will begin the next control systems class by solving some physical examples using Routh-Hurwitz criteria, and then we will move to something which is called as the Nyquist plots. Okay. So if there is no question, then I think we can all disperse, and good day. I'll see you tomorrow in the DSP class. Thank you. Is there a question? Okay then. See you. Bye-bye. Good day.